happy workforce is a productive workforce. But just how happy can you be when after a long day at work, you return home without a decent roof over your head? Hello and welcome to A Business 7. In tonight's program, we'll be looking at the housing crisis in Namibia and what can be done to change that. Will the COVID-19 pandemic result in a global financial crisis? Later in the program, we have expert opinions on this. Please stay tuned. According to the revised national housing policy, which was released last month, the Namibian government will have to spend and invest about 2 billion Namibian dollars every year to provide decent housing to the low and ultra-low income groups in Namibia by 2030. To give you an idea of the current state of informal housing, Jana-Mari Smith spoke to Heinrich Amushila from the Namibia Housing Action Group.
For housing, you need many hands to pull together in order so that we can build more houses in this country, and we can. It's really getting out of hand. A country with so many resources, we need to do more so that we can assist the poor. I think that gap between the rich and the poor, it's just continue widening. It's not narrowing. My name is Amushila Heinrich. I'm the co-director for Namibia Housing Action Group. Namibia Housing Action Group is an organization that supports the work of the Shack Dweller Federation of Namibia. The Shack Dweller Federation of Namibia is a network of saving groups organized in most urban centers in Namibia. We have over 1,000 saving groups currently organized in the whole of Namibia, and we have over 34,000 members who have saved over 34 million. That is their general and land saving. When land becomes available, the members will then buy land from the local authorities.
Can you tell me the situation of informal settlements in Namibia?
I think it has become evident the informal settlement has really grown. You've seen the mushrooming of informal settlement. It's really a very big problem. And most of the communities are really pushing that they want to have their own land, because the situation in the informal settlement is very, very bad. People don't have access to sanitation. Water is now there, but then people want their own toilets. They want their own water taps at home. There are standpipes in the informal settlement, and also the living condition. People living in shacks, it's really a tough life. I think people are really suffering. So the situation in the informal settlement is really very bad, and it needs to be addressed. We are working with various organizations under the umbrella of the National Alliance for Informal Settlement Upgrading. each organization is bringing their skills so that we can scale up the upgrade of informal settlement. We are working with the Ministry of Urban and also Ministry of Water, Agriculture and Land Reform through the flexible land tenure that must provide titles to the homeowners. I think the solution is within the community. When we upgrade, many communities participate in the upgrade of this informal settlement. And currently, we are also busy with upgrading of informal settlement in, I think it's about in 21 local authorities. I think what we need is resources from government, resources from private sector. I think if all partners or stakeholders come together and pull resources together, I think we'll be able to scale up the informal settlement upgrading in our country.
We recently heard about a fire breaking out in an informal settlement where a very young little boy also died and more than 100 people lost their home.
It's really a very big problem that the country faces, and it's really affecting the people. They become landless or they become homeless. I think with the biggest fire in 2020 that affected the formerly Toroka in Wolfish Bay, we supported our community through the buy brick of Standard Bank to build 32 houses, and then government also stepped in to assist the community with over 200 houses. At the moment, I think these people has now access to land and they have homes that they can call their homes. But this, if we can replicate what Otea has done, I think we will be able to provide homes to many people where all stakeholders put resources together and government come in as a facilitator and also provide resources to alleviate the plight of the shack owners.
Is there enough urgency to tackle this problem that has been described as a humanitarian disaster?
First of all, I think it was good for the political leadership from the highest office to declare the informal settlement as a humanitarian crisis. But I think there is still a need to put that declaration into action by maybe create a fund and then maybe tap from each ministry 5% of their budget, put in that fund and start and that becomes a budget for informal settlement upgrading. I think we need to move into that direction. At the moment, the country does not have a informal settlement upgrading strategy. It's something that we are working on currently together with government, so that the country has a informal settlement upgrading strategy.
Russia's maneuvers in Eastern Europe remain very topical. How will this affect the global economy? The International Monetary Fund released this video.
Our world is more interconnected than ever. So when conflicts happen, they affect the economies of many other countries. Usually neighboring countries suffer the most. They are the most impacted by geopolitical tensions and refugee flows, which can put a major strain on resources. But countries with strong trade links can also be severely impacted. A contraction in commodity trade would not only raise prices of commodities, but it can put a dent on consumer confidence and purchasing power. High inflation diminishes real incomes and suppresses demand for goods and services, eating into consumer spending. When this happens, financial conditions could tighten as central banks raise interest rates. And if confidence is hit hard, demand could significantly decrease. Right now, we're seeing tightening measures go faster and further in some countries, and that is worrisome for countries that are in a tight place to begin with. It will weigh on economic growth, add to stresses on public finances, and potentially even add to risks of social unrest, especially for countries dependent on food and energy imports. In countries with weak social safety nets and few job opportunities, scarcity and rising prices will hit poor and vulnerable households the hardest. Policymakers will have to strike the delicate balance between containing inflation and supporting the economic recovery from the pandemic. This can be especially challenging as volatility in global financial markets reduces business confidence and limits investment. Longer term, this could have implications on the global supply chain system and integrated financial markets. While the future is still very uncertain, we may see significant changes in the global economic order as the energy trade flows shift, payment systems fragment, and countries rethink their financial dependence on each other.
A lot has changed in the past 160 plus years, but the world is evolving faster every day. Founder Samuel Lowell Price's version of a self-driving car was a really smart horse. Who knows how our great-grandchildren will get around? Here at PwC, we know we're responsible for guiding our people, clients, and communities through this constant change. How do we engage the more than 220,000 people across 157 countries in the PwC network? Through a clear and simple purpose, to build trust in society and solve important problems. What that really means is, in between our morning coffees and our evening commutes home, we all live and breathe the same core values. Here they are, the 5 things that make us, us. We act with integrity. We speak up for what's right, even when it's the harder option. We make a difference. We stay informed and proactively look for ways to better our world. We care about each other, about our clients and stakeholders, about empowering everyone to do their best. We work together. We know feedback, collaboration, and diverse perspectives help us deliver the highest quality outcomes. We reimagine the possible. Nothing great ever came from sticking with the status quo. We always challenge ourselves to innovate. Our values make us who we are and will help propel us toward the legacy we've envisioned for the future. A sentiment Sam and his horse would have definitely stood behind.
Could the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath result in a global financial crisis? Here's what the chief economist of the World Bank, Carmen Reinhart, thinks.
Protracted declines in income, now rising inflation, rising poverty rates, all these things combine to a lot of financial stress.
On this edition of Expert Answers, we're asking if the COVID-19 pandemic could lead to a financial crisis, and if so, what can be done to prevent it? Over the past 2 years, governments around the world have enacted massive support programs, and those programs have helped blunt some of the worst impacts of the pandemic. But they're going to have to be scaled back, and when they are, what happens then? Are we in for a global financial chain reaction? For answers to these and other questions, I recently spoke to the World Bank Group's chief economist, Carmen Reinhart. Well, Carmen, thank you so much for being here. You warned here in the latest edition of the World Development Report that we're facing the largest global economic crisis in more than a century. Is this an inevitable consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, very few things are inevitable, but certainly this has been a once in a century pandemic. So the ramifications, especially for developing countries, protracted declines in income, now rising inflation, rising poverty rates, all these things combine to a lot of financial stress for households, for firms, and for financial institutions. And so that's the big focus of the World Development Report, these interconnected vulnerabilities of the various sectors.
And you talk about in the report this idea of a financial chain reaction. Can you explain that? I imagine it has to do with some of that interconnectedness you're talking about, and what are some of the biggest threats you're seeing?
Look, you have within country interconnectedness and across country interconnectedness. Let me give you examples of the former and of the latter. And the causality in this interconnectedness run both ways. So if households and firms have a tough time repaying debt, if the quality of bank assets deteriorates, they may need support from the government. In the most extreme cases, government bailouts often inform government taking on all the debt of or a substantial portion of the debt of banks. So starts out as private debt, becomes public debt. It's a problem. It's a spillover from the private sector to the public sector. Reverse causality also is a big issue. This is the so-called doom loop. So governments borrow a lot. They place a lot of their debt at the banks. If they have a debt servicing problem, it becomes a problem for the banks. It's very interconnected. And so there is this internal interconnectedness within country, and then there is the potential for cross-border spillovers.
Talk to me about some of the global risks that you've seen and identified in the latest copy of the World Development Report.
I think when you talk about the global context and a global chain reaction, you're really talking about countries that have a big footprint in the global economy. So let's talk about the US and let's talk about China. I think you asked me about risks that could have ripple effects on not just a couple of emerging markets or developing countries, but on a lot of them. I think high on everyone's list is what do rising interest rates in the US mean for developing countries and emerging markets? In the short run, it's adding to the risks that they already face. US interest rates go up, international interest rates go up. This means that debt servicing, which is already quite high and significant for many of these countries, the cost of borrowing gets higher, debt servicing burdens increase. That's not good news. In the short run, I say, because I think it's in everyone's, it's good news for everyone to get inflation down. So, but let's focus on the short-term risks. The other short-term risk that has, chain reactions across countries is China was the biggest lender and the biggest engine of growth after the global financial crisis to many developing countries, especially low-income countries, borrowed a lot from China. And that engine of growth that China, that role that it played after the global financial crisis. Remember, on average, China grew about 10% between 2003 and 2013. It's not going to be there this time around. And not only is it a slowing in growth, but also I think there will be much more reticent to lend to developing countries because they have their own domestic financial sector issues with the crash in real estate.
This report has a special focus on private debt. What are you finding about it? What are some of the implications looking forward?
Look, if you take 2020, 90% of the countries in the world had simultaneous output declines, income declines. That's more than the Depression, than World War I, than World War II. Imagine what that kind of across-the-board decline in income does to households and firms. Many firms don't have the cushion, the buffer to keep their businesses open beyond a couple of months. Many households faced with that decline in income don't have the saving cushion. And so this creates, as I said, all kinds of strains on their ability to repay existing debt. We saw major financial forbearance during 2020 and 2021. We still continue to see it. What this means is that once those forbearance policies, which have allowed households and firms to delay repayment in many instances, once those policies are scaled back or done away with, then we're going to find out what the true underlying vulnerabilities are that were masked to some degree by the support measures.
So Carmen, the report talks about this idea of hidden risk. What do you mean by that? What should we be worried about?
Well, Paul, for years now, I've been working on financial crises issues. And in crises, I always make the point, it's not what you see that often gets you, it's what you don't see. The hidden problems have two dimensions. One is, in a nutshell, the government has a higher level of debt than what has been disclosed. These are the hidden debt problems. There's been a lot of lending by non-Paris Club creditors, and accounting of those debts is not as complete as it could be. On the newer side, the post-COVID or the COVID legacy side, what we have is the potential for non-performing loans, because for across the board, many countries relaxed accounting standards, adopted forbearance in what banks declare as non-performing. And in effect, a lot of the data on non-performing in 2020 and 2021 looks a lot like non-performing loans in 2019. Yet, however, if you look at things like corporate surveys that ask firms to identify themselves as having debt problems, as not being able to repay, the response rate would make you think that non-performing loans should be much higher. If you look at firm bankruptcies, same story. So there's clearly now the opaqueness problem, the lack of transparency problem has not only hidden debt at the sovereign level, but risks in the form of hidden non-performing loans at the bank level.
We talked a lot about inequality. The bank has talked a lot about how the pandemic has made inequality both within countries and between countries worse. You talk about that in this report. What are some of the findings? What are you highlighting when it comes to inequality in this report?
The most vulnerable households and firms are probably the ones that they're the last to have access to credit, and they're probably the first to lose it. When conditions of economic uncertainty, like what we're living through, greater uncertainty about economic prospects, about recovery, financial institutions become much more risk averse. They tighten lending standards, which means that some of the small businesses are big employers, but they also importantly rely on working capital. Households that have little buffer or no buffer in terms of saving may also rely on including micro lending networks. If the access to credit is lost, the impact is disproportionately felt on the most vulnerable.
So Carmen, you've laid out some of the problems that you found and are highlighting in the World Development Report. What practically be done to address some of these challenges?
So look, the first part is diagnosing the problem. It's early detection. Early detection in this environment is very tricky. So knowing the true extent of non-performing loans in financial institutions is a task that's easier said than done. So detection, and once the problem and the scale of the problem is assessed, then comes the following actions, which is fast restructuring. And so from prompt detection to prompt resolution, debt write-offs, restructuring, that is the agenda, if you will.
Well, Carmen Reinhart, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
A huge thanks to Carmen Reinhart for her time. If you want to learn more, be sure to check out the latest edition of the World Development Report. You can find that at worldbank.org/WDR. And send us an email with your feedback. We love to hear your comments, your questions about this program. expertanswers@worldbank.org. Until next time, goodbye.
You know, a few weeks ago, I would never do this on a Saturday morning. Back then, I was standing in line all day. Now it's just like that.
You are using the FNB banking app like I told you.
Girl, it saved my weekend. Now I can do all my banking on this.
Payments, transfers, checking statements.
Even opening accounts.
Just like that.
Oh, did I tell you what my husband did?
Even me, I want to save time with the, what's the name of the app?
FNB app.
Don't be left behind. Make the switch to the FNB app, online banking or cell phone banking, and change the way you bank to change your life. FNB, how can we help you?
Thank you for joining us in the Business 7 studio. We will be back next week at the same time and the same place. Until then, take care.